The aftermath of the orbital station's destruction left Arendor in a state of quiet uncertainty. The rebels had won, but the victory felt hollow without the people they had lost along the way. Emily wandered through the remnants of the colony, her steps slow and heavy. Every corner she turned reminded her of someone who was no longer there. Daniel's laughter, Rachel's fierce determination, Lucas's steady voice guiding them through impossible challenges. The scars of battle were etched not just into the land, but into her heart as well. Survivors gathered in groups, tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. Fires burned across the landscape, consuming what remained of the Overseer's machinery and symbols of oppression. It was both a practical and symbolic act, a way to cleanse the planet of the past and make room for something new. Yet even as they worked together, an unspoken question lingered in the air. What came next? Grace called a meeting in the center of the settlement, where survivors from all corners of Arendor had begun to congregate. People sat on makeshift benches or stood in clusters, their faces weary but attentive. When Grace spoke, her voice carried a weight that demanded respect. "We've taken back our freedom," she began. "But freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's the chance to build something better, to create a world where everyone has a voice, where no one is forced to suffer for another's greed, her." Words resonated deeply, sparking murmurs of agreement among the crowd. For years, the enslaved workers had been told they were nothing more than tools, expendable and powerless. Now, for the first time, they had the opportunity to prove otherwise. But rebuilding wouldn't be easy. The colony was in ruins, its resources depleted and its infrastructure crumbling. Food was scarce, medical supplies even scarcer, and the threat of retaliation from surviving overseers still loomed. Emily listened intently, her mind racing with ideas. She had spent so long focused on fighting that she hadn't considered what peace might look like. Could they really start over? And if so, how? As Grace continued speaking, Emily realized the answer lay in unity. They had achieved the impossible by working together, and that same spirit would guide them forward. The first step was gathering resources. Teams were organized to scavenge what they could from the wreckage, salvaging materials to build shelters, repair equipment, and grow food. Others ventured beyond the colony, exploring areas untouched by mining operations in search of fertile land and fresh water. Emily joined these expeditions, her leadership skills proving invaluable. She encouraged cooperation and fairness, ensuring that every contribution was recognized and valued. One day, while leading a group through a dense forest on the outskirts of the colony, they stumbled upon something unexpected: a small community of settlers who had lived in hiding for decades. These people had fled the Overseer's rule long ago, carving out a life in secrecy. At first, they were wary of outsiders, but when Emily explained what had happened, they welcomed the newcomers with open arms. Together, they shared knowledge, skills, and resources, strengthening both groups in the process. As weeks turned into months, the settlement grew. Homes were built, crops planted, and schools established to teach the younger generation about history, science, and art. The artifacts, once feared and misunderstood, became tools of inspiration rather than destruction. Experts studied them, carefully unlocking their secrets to improve daily life without repeating the mistakes of the past. Energy systems powered by the artifacts provided light and warmth, while advanced irrigation techniques allowed farmers to cultivate previously barren soil. But progress wasn't without challenges. Disagreements arose over how best to allocate resources, and old fears occasionally resurfaced, threatening to divide the fragile community. Emily found herself mediating disputes, reminding everyone of the sacrifices made to get this far. "We didn't fight to replace one form of control with another," she said during one heated argument. "We fought for freedom, for everyone. Let's honor that by working together." Her words helped ease tensions. But the real turning point came when a former overseer enforcer arrived at the settlement seeking refuge. His name was Marcus, and he claimed to have defected after witnessing the destruction of the orbital station. Many were skeptical, unwilling to trust someone who had once served the enemy. But Emily saw an opportunity. "Hate won't heal us," she told the council when they debated whether to accept Marcus. "If we turn him away, we're no better than the overseers. Give him a chance to prove himself." Reluctantly, the council agreed, assigning Marcus to menial tasks under close supervision. Over time, his actions earned their trust. He worked tirelessly alongside the others, sharing insights about the overseers' tactics and helping fortify the settlement against potential threats. His presence served as a reminder that change was possible, even for those who had once been part of the problem. As the settlement continued to thrive, stories of the rebellion spread far beyond Arendor. Refugees from other colonies heard whispers of a place where people lived free, governed not by fear but by mutual respect. Some traveled great distances to join them, bringing fresh perspectives and talents. Artists painted murals depicting the uprising, musicians composed songs celebrating courage and resilience, and writers documented the journey so future generations would never forget. Emily often found herself reflecting on how far they had come. Late at night, she would sit beneath the stars, gazing at the horizon where the orbital station had once stood. Though grief still lingered, she felt a sense of peace knowing that Daniel's sacrifice and the sacrifices of so many others had not been in vain. Their legacy lived on in the laughter of children playing in the streets, in the hum of machines powered by clean energy, and in the shared meals that brought the community together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Grace approached Emily. "You've done remarkable work," she said softly. "This place wouldn't be what it is today without you." Emily shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. We did this together." Grace smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's exactly why it succeeded. You reminded us that we're stronger united than divided." In the months that followed, Emily stepped back from leadership, allowing others to take charge. She knew the settlement didn't need a single leader. It needed a collective effort. Instead, she focused on preserving the memory of those who had fallen, creating a memorial at the edge of the settlement. Carved into stone were the names of the fallen, alongside a simple inscription, "They called us slaves, but we burned their legacy to the ground." Years passed, and the settlement flourished. What had once been a barren wasteland transformed into a thriving hub of innovation and culture. People from across the galaxy came to see the place where freedom had been reclaimed, where chains had been broken and hope had taken root. And though the scars of the past would never fully fade, they served as a reminder of how far humanity could rise when united by a common purpose. Emily eventually retired to a quiet home on the outskirts of the settlement, spending her days tending to a garden and mentoring young leaders. She often thought of Daniel, imagining the pride he would feel seeing what they had built. On clear nights, she still sat beneath the stars, finding solace in the vastness of the universe and the knowledge that their struggle had mattered. For the people of Arendor, the future was no longer defined by oppression or despair. It was a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with dreams and possibilities. And as long as they remembered the lessons of their past, the cost of freedom and the power of unity, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. From the ashes of slavery, a new legacy had risen, one of hope, resilience, and the unyielding belief that a better world was always within reach. The final battle loomed like a storm on the horizon. The rebellion had grown stronger in the weeks since their arrival at the refugee settlement, but so too had the overseers' forces. Reports came daily of new enforcers being deployed to Arendor, their weapons more advanced and their tactics more ruthless. The settlers knew time was running out. If they were going to strike, it had to be now. Preparations moved quickly. Weapons were forged from scraps of metal and salvaged parts, crude but effective. Traps were set along key routes leading to the colony, designed to slow down the enemy and give the rebels an advantage. Supplies were stockpiled, and plans were rehearsed until everyone knew their role by heart. At the center of it all were the artifacts, their power harnessed through painstaking effort by Lucas and the settlement's experts. They had learned how to channel the energy into bursts, capable of disabling entire squads of enforcers or crippling machinery. It was a weapon unlike anything the overseers could imagine. Emily took charge of organizing the fighters, her leadership skills growing with each passing day. She divided them into teams based on their strengths. Some would handle direct combat, others sabotage, and still others defense. Daniel, though not fully recovered, insisted on joining the fight. "I'm not sitting this one out," he said, firmly when Emily tried to argue. His determination left no room for debate. As the day of the assault approached, tension filled the air. Conversations grew quieter, laughter faded, and even the children seemed to sense the gravity of what was about to happen. On the eve of the battle, the rebels gathered around a large fire, sharing stories and memories of those they had lost. Grace, the elder who had welcomed them, spoke softly, but with conviction. "We fight not just for ourselves, but for every person who has suffered under the overseer's rule. This is our chance to break free, to create a world where no one lives in fear." Her words resonated deeply, igniting a quiet resolve in everyone present. When the meeting ended, Emily found herself sitting alone near the fire, staring into its flickering flames. Her mind wandered to the sacrifices that had brought them here, the lives lost, the risks taken, the pain endured. She thought of Rachel, whose fiery spirit had inspired so many, of Lucas, whose brilliance had unlocked the artifact's secrets, and of Daniel, whose courage had saved them more times than she could count. Each of them carried scars, visible and invisible, but none had given up, and neither would she. At dawn, the rebels moved out. The plan was simple yet daring: launch a multi-pronged attack on the overseer's remaining strongholds while simultaneously targeting their supply lines. The goal was to stretch their forces thin, creating openings for the final push toward the orbital station, the last bastion of the overseer's power. The artifacts would play a crucial role, providing bursts of energy to disable defenses and clear paths for the rebels. The first wave of attacks went better than expected. Teams struck swiftly and decisively, catching the overseers off guard. Explosions rocked the landscape as supply depots were destroyed and communication hubs disabled. Enforcers scrambled to respond, but the rebels' knowledge of the terrain gave them the upper hand. Morale soared as reports of success poured in, fueling the momentum of the uprising. But the overseers weren't defeated yet. Reinforcements arrived faster than anticipated, forcing the rebels to adapt on the fly. Skirmishes broke out across the colony, turning the area into a chaotic battlefield. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed endlessly. Through it all, Emily led her team with unwavering focus, her voice cutting through the chaos, to keep them moving forward. Daniel fought alongside her, his movements slower than usual, but no less determined. He wielded a makeshift spear with surprising skill, holding his own against waves of enemies. Despite his injuries, he refused to back down, drawing strength from the people around him. "We're almost there," he said between breaths, his voice steady. "Don't stop now." As the battle raged, Lucas worked tirelessly to maintain control of the artifacts. Positioned at the edge of the conflict, he coordinated their use, directing bursts of energy to critical points. The artifacts, hummed with power, their light casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. Each discharge sent shockwaves rippling outward, scattering enforcers and disabling vehicles. But the strain was taking its toll. Sweat poured down Lucas's face as he struggled to keep the system stable, his hands trembling from exertion. Finally, the moment came to make the final push toward the orbital station. The rebels regrouped, battered but unbroken, and prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission. The station was heavily fortified, protected by layers of shields and automated defenses. Breaking through would require everything they had and more. Emily volunteered to lead the infiltration team, knowing the risks involved. "I'll go," she said firmly when others offered to take her place. "I know the layout better than anyone else." Reluctantly, they agreed, forming a small group to accompany her. Among them was Daniel, who refused to let her go alone. The journey to the station was harrowing. Patrols roamed the perimeter, forcing the team to move cautiously. They used stealth and quick thinking to slip past guards, relying on the cover of darkness and the distraction provided by ongoing battles elsewhere. When they reached the outer walls, they discovered a problem. The entrance was sealed, its massive doors reinforced with steel. Without a way inside, their mission would fail. It was then that Emily remembered the artifacts. Pulling out the device connected to the network, she activated it, hoping it would interface with the station's systems. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the doors began to open, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. "Let's move," she whispered, leading the way inside. The interior of the station was a maze of corridors and chambers, patrolled by enforcers and monitored by surveillance drones. The team moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding detection whenever possible. Along the way, they encountered resistance, engaging in fierce firefights that left them breathless and bloodied. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Their ultimate destination was the control room, where the Overseer's command systems were housed. Reaching it required navigating a series of security checkpoints, each more heavily guarded than the last. As they approached the final barrier, disaster struck. One of their members triggered an alarm, alerting the entire station to their presence. Within moments, enforcers flooded the area, surrounding them. "We can't hold them off forever," Daniel said, his voice strained as he fired at the advancing enemies. "You need to go ahead." "No!" Emily protested, unwilling to leave him behind, but before she could argue further, he shoved her toward the door. "Go!" he shouted. "Finish this!" Tears blurred her vision as she hesitated, torn between duty and love. Finally, with a heavy heart, she obeyed, sprinting toward the control room while the rest of the team held the line. Inside, she found the central console, its screens displaying streams of data and commands. Using the artifact device, she interfaced with the system, initiating a sequence to overload the station's core. Alarms blared as the process began, warning of imminent destruction. Outside, the team fought valiantly, buying Emily precious seconds. One by one, they fell, their sacrifices ensuring her success. When the last defender went down, Daniel stood, alone, his body battered, but defiant. As enforcers closed in, he detonated a hidden explosive, sealing the corridor and preventing them from reaching Emily. Back in the control room, Emily watched the countdown tick away. The station trembled as the core destabilized, signaling the end. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered a silent goodbye to Daniel and the others who had given everything for this moment. Then, with a final surge of energy, the station erupted in a blinding explosion, lighting up the sky like a second sun. When the dust settled, silence fell over Arendor. The Overseer's reign was over, their legacy reduced to ash. Survivors emerged from hiding, their faces etched with disbelief and relief. Though the cost had been high, the victory was undeniable. Together they began the long process of rebuilding, vowing to create a society built on equality and justice. In the days that followed, Emily walked among the ruins, her heart heavy with grief, but also filled with hope. She thought of Daniel often, remembering his bravery and sacrifice. Though he was gone, his spirit lived on in the dreams of a brighter future. And as she looked out over the horizon, she knew one thing for certain. They had burned the legacy of slavery to the ground, and from its ashes a new dawn would rise. The victory at the underground chamber came at a heavy cost. Daniel lay unconscious, his body battered and broken from the grenade blast. Emily refused to leave his side, her hands trembling as she tended to his wounds. The makeshift medical supplies they had brought were barely enough to stabilize him, and every breath he took felt like a fragile gift. Lucas worked tirelessly to keep Daniel alive, using what little knowledge he had of medicine to clean and bandage the injuries. Despite their efforts, it was clear that Daniel's condition was dire. "He needs proper care," Lucas said finally, his voice low and strained. "We can't do this alone." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do?" she whispered, clutching Daniel's hand tightly. "We find help," Rachel replied firmly. Though still recovering from her own injuries, she had insisted on joining the group after hearing about the mission's success and its aftermath. "There are people outside the colony who might be willing to assist us. Smugglers, traders, anyone with resources. It was a risky plan. Venturing beyond the colony meant exposing themselves to dangers they couldn't predict. But staying put wasn't an option either. The overseers were hunting for survivors of the attack, and their forces were closing in. With no other choice, the group prepared to leave under the cover of darkness. Before they departed, Emily made a promise to herself and to Daniel. "You're going to make it," she whispered, leaning close to him. "I won't let you give up." Her words were soft, but filled with determination. She knew Daniel had sacrificed himself to save them, and she owed it to him to keep fighting. The journey out of the colony was fraught with peril. Armed patrols roamed the barren landscape, their spotlights cutting through the thick haze that blanketed Arendor. The rebels moved cautiously, sticking to shadows and abandoned structures to avoid detection. Every step felt like a gamble, but they pressed on, driven by desperation and hope. After hours of travel, they reached the outskirts of the colony, where the ground gave way to rocky plains and jagged cliffs. It was here that they encountered their first real test, a checkpoint manned by overseer enforcers. The guards were vigilant, scanning every vehicle and pedestrian that passed through. Sneaking past undetected seemed impossible. Rachel took charge, her sharp mind working quickly. "We'll create a distraction," she said. "Draw their attention away from the main road." She turned to two members of the group, instructing them to set off a small explosion nearby. The plan was risky, but it worked. The sound of the blast drew the guards away, leaving the path temporarily unguarded. Seizing the opportunity, the group hurried through the checkpoint, carrying Daniel as gently as possible. They didn't stop until they were far enough away to catch their breath. Exhausted and shaken, they regrouped beneath the shadow of a massive cliff. "That was too close," Lucas muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "We can't keep doing this. We don't have a choice," Emily snapped, her voice tinged with frustration. "If we stop, we die. Is that what you want?" Lucas didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. They all knew the stakes. Failure meant death, not just for them, but for everyone counting on their success. As they continued their trek, the landscape grew more desolate. The air was colder here, biting at their skin and making each step harder than the last. Supplies dwindled, forcing them to ration food and water carefully. Morale wavered, especially as Daniel's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring incoherently when awake. Emily stayed by his side, feeding him sips of water and speaking softly to keep him calm. Finally, after days of relentless travel, they spotted signs of life. A cluster of tents and makeshift shelters nestled in a shallow valley. Smoke rose from small fires, and the faint hum of conversation carried on the wind. This was a smuggler's camp, a place where outcasts and opportunists gathered to trade goods and information. It wasn't safe, but it was their best chance. Approaching cautiously, the group flagged down a trader named Sam, a wiry man with weathered skin and piercing eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone wary but curious. "We need help," Emily said, stepping forward. "Our friend is injured, and we have nowhere else to go." Sam studied them for a moment, then gestured for them to follow him. He led them to a larger tent, where a woman named Clara tended to those in need. She was a former medic who had fled the colony years ago, disillusioned by the cruelty of the overseers. When she saw Daniel, her expression softened. "Put him down," she instructed. "I'll do what I can." For hours, Clara worked to stabilize Daniel, cleaning his wounds and administering medication scavenged from her limited supplies. The rest of the group waited anxiously outside, pacing and whispering among themselves. Emily sat near the entrance, her eyes fixed on the tent flap, praying for good news. When Clara finally emerged, her face was grim but hopeful. "He's strong," she said, "but he's not out of danger yet. He'll need rest and care, things I can't fully provide here." "What do we do?" Emily asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "There's a settlement farther north," Clara explained. "A community of refugees who've escaped the colonies. They might be able to help, but getting there won't be easy." The group exchanged worried glances. Another journey loomed ahead, longer and more treacherous than the last, yet none of them hesitated. If it meant saving Daniel and continuing their fight, they would endure whatever challenges lay in their path. Before leaving the smugglers' camp, they struck a deal with Sam. In exchange for supplies and guidance, they shared fragments of the knowledge they had gained from the artifacts. Sam listened intently, his greed momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. "You're playing with fire," he warned. "That kind of power doesn't come without consequences." "We know," Lucas replied. "But sometimes you have to burn the past to build a future." With renewed determination, the group set out once again. The journey to the refugee settlement tested their limits, pushing them to the brink of exhaustion. Along the way, they faced harsh weather, scarce resources, and the constant threat of pursuit by overseer forces. But they also found moments of unexpected kindness, from strangers who offered shelter, from children who smiled despite their hardships, and from one another, bound together by shared purpose. When they finally reached the settlement, they were greeted with cautious optimism. The refugees, though wary of outsiders, recognized the symbols etched into the artifacts the group carried. Whispers spread quickly, and soon a council of elders convened to hear their story. Emily spoke for the group, her voice steady despite her fatigue. She told them of the rebellion, of the artifacts, and of the sacrifices made along the way. By the time she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. One of the elders, a woman named Grace, broke the silence. "You've done what many thought impossible," she said, "but the fight isn't over. The overseers will retaliate, and when they do, they'll come with everything they have." "We're ready," Emily replied, her resolve unwavering. "We've come too far to turn back now." Grace nodded, impressed by her courage. "Then you'll have our support," she said. "Together, we'll prepare for what's to come." In the days that followed, the group settled into the settlement, forming bonds with its inhabitants. Daniel slowly began to recover, his strength returning bit by bit. The artifacts became the focus of intense study, with experts from the settlement working alongside Lucas to unlock their secrets. Plans were drawn up for a final assault on the overseer's remaining forces, a coordinated effort that would bring an end to decades of oppression. But even as hope grew, so did the sense of impending conflict. The overseers weren't idle. Reports trickled in of reinforcements being sent to Arendor, of new technologies being deployed to crush the rebellion once and for all. The battle ahead would be fierce, and the outcome uncertain. Yet amid the uncertainty, there was a spark of something greater: unity. For the first time, the enslaved workers of Arendor stood united, their chains weakened by the fire of defiance. Together, they vowed to see the fight through to the end, no matter the cost. And as Emily looked out over the settlement, watching the sun rise over the horizon, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. The legacy of slavery would burn, and from its ashes a new world would rise. The aftermath of the attack left the colony in a state of uneasy tension. The overseers, furious at the loss of one of their most productive mining facilities, tightened their grip on the remaining operations. Armed patrols roamed the streets, and mines with increasing frequency, their rifles ready to fire at the slightest provocation. Curfews were enforced more strictly than ever, and anyone caught outside after dark faced immediate punishment. Yet despite the heightened security, whispers of rebellion continued to spread like wildfire among the enslaved workers. For Daniel and Emily, life became a delicate balancing act. During the day, they toiled in the mines as if nothing had changed, keeping their heads down to avoid suspicion. But at night, they joined the rebels in secret meetings held in abandoned tunnels or hidden rooms. These gatherings were filled with both hope and fear. On one hand, the success of the recent attack had proven that the overseers weren't invincible. On the other, the cost of that victory weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Rachel's injury was a constant reminder of how dangerous the fight for freedom truly was. Lucas remained focused on deciphering the artifacts, convinced they held the key to turning the tide against the overseers. He spent hours each day studying the strange symbols and patterns, piecing together fragments of knowledge left behind by the ancient civilization that had created them. "It's not just about understanding what these things do," he explained during one meeting. "It's about figuring out why they were made. What purpose did they serve? And can we use them without causing harm?" Emily listened intently, her curiosity growing with every passing day. She had always been drawn to the artifacts, feeling an inexplicable connection to them. When she touched the objects, it was as though they responded to her presence, their hums resonating deep within her chest. Lucas noticed this too and began involving her more closely in his work. Together, they uncovered clues suggesting the artifacts were part of a larger system, a network designed to harness energy on a scale far beyond anything humans had ever achieved. The implications were staggering, but so were the risks. As the days passed, divisions began to form within the rebellion. Some members, emboldened by their recent success, argued for escalating the attacks. They wanted to strike directly at the heart of the Overseer's power, their fortified command center located high above the planet in orbit. Others, including Lucas, urged caution. "We're not ready for something like that," he warned. "If we rush in blindly, we'll lose everything." Rachel, still recovering from her injuries, sided with Lucas. Though she had always been a fierce advocate for action, even she recognized the need for strategy. "We've come too far to throw it all away now," she said during one heated debate. "Let's focus on freeing more workers and building our strength. Then we'll hit them where it hurts." But not everyone agreed. A man named Ethan, who had recently joined the rebellion, pushed hard for an immediate assault on the orbital station. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a booming voice that commanded attention, Ethan saw no point in waiting. "Every day we delay is another day the overseers have to prepare," he argued. "They already know we're coming. Let's take the fight to them before they crush us." His words struck a chord with many of the younger rebels, those who had grown up knowing only oppression and despair. For them, patience felt like weakness, a luxury they couldn't afford. Emily found herself torn between the two sides. Part of her understood Ethan's urgency, Every moment wasted meant more suffering for their people. But she also trusted Lucas's judgment. If anyone could unlock the secrets of the artifacts, it was him. Daniel, meanwhile, struggled with his own doubts. He admired Emily's courage and Lucas's determination, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces they didn't fully understand. The artifacts were powerful, yes, but they were also unpredictable. What if using them unleashed consequences they couldn't control? The thought haunted him, keeping him awake at night. Despite the disagreements, the rebellion pressed on. Small acts of sabotage continued to disrupt the Overseer's operations, buying time for Lucas and Emily to make progress with the artifacts. Slowly but surely, they began to piece together a plan. The ancient system appeared to be capable of generating massive amounts of energy, enough to disable entire sections of the orbital station. If they could activate it correctly, they might be able to cripple the Overseer's command center without risking direct confrontation. But activating the system required access to a specific location, an underground chamber buried deep beneath the surface of Arendor. According to the information they had gathered, this chamber served as the central hub for the artifact network. Reaching it would be nearly impossible, given the increased security measures implemented by the Overseers. Still, Lucas insisted. It was worth the risk. "If we can get there, we can turn the tables," he said. "This is our best chance." The decision to attempt the mission sparked yet another round of arguments. Ethan dismissed the idea as foolish, claiming it was a waste of resources. "Why bother with some old machine when we could be hitting them head-on?" he demanded. But Rachel supported Lucas, recognizing the potential of the artifacts to shift the balance of power. In the end, it was Emily who cast the deciding vote. "We'll try it," she said firmly. "If it works, it could change everything." Preparations for the mission began immediately. A small team was assembled consisting of Daniel, Emily, Lucas, and a few trusted allies. Each member had a specific role to play, from navigating the treacherous terrain to protecting the group from enemy patrols. Supplies were gathered in secret, including food, water, and medical kits. Weapons were fashioned from whatever materials. They could scavenge, crude but effective. On the night of the mission, the air was thick with anticipation. The team gathered in a secluded tunnel, checking their gear one last time before setting out. Lucas carried a map sketched from memory, marking the estimated location of the underground chamber. Emily clutched a small device connected to the artifacts, hoping it would guide them safely to their destination. Daniel stood beside her, his expression grim but resolute. "Remember," Rachel said as she bid them farewell, "this isn't just about winning. It's about creating a future where no one has to live like we do. Don't let fear hold you back." With those words echoing in their minds, the team ventured into the darkness. The journey was grueling, taking them through narrow passages and across treacherous landscapes. At times, they had to crawl on their hands and knees to avoid detection by patrolling guards. Other times, they relied on stealth and quick thinking to slip past checkpoints undetected. Every step brought them closer to their goal and closer to danger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the entrance to the underground chamber. It was concealed behind a massive stone door etched with the same symbols as the artifacts. Lucas examined the markings carefully, his fingers tracing the intricate designs. "This is it," he whispered. "Stand back." He placed his hands on the door, pressing firmly against the symbols. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the ground began to shake. The door slid open, revealing a cavernous space illuminated by a soft blue glow. Inside, the central hub of the artifact network pulsed with energy, its surface covered in shifting patterns that seemed alive. Emily approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She extended her hand toward the hub, hesitating for a split second. Before making contact, Instantly, the room came alive, lights flashing and machinery whirring to life. The hum grew louder, vibrating through their bodies. Lucas worked quickly, inputting commands based on the knowledge he had gained from studying the artifacts. The system responded, channeling energy into a single beam directed upward, toward the orbital station. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. The overseers had detected the activation and were mobilizing forces to stop them. Gunfire echoed in the distance as guards closed in. "We need to go!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Emily's arm, but Lucas refused to leave. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I need a few more seconds." The team formed a defensive perimeter around him, fending off waves of attackers. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as chaos erupted. Despite the odds, they held their ground, determined to protect Lucas until he finished his task. Then, with a final keystroke, the system reached full power. A brilliant flash of light shot upward, piercing through the surface and into the sky. Moments later, explosions rocked the orbital station, visible even from the depths of the chamber. Cheers erupted among the rebels as they realized what had happened. The Overseer's command center was falling, but their celebration was short-lived. As they turned to flee, a grenade landed at their feet. Daniel dove for it, throwing himself on top of the explosive just as it detonated. The blast knocked everyone off their feet, leaving Daniel unconscious and bleeding heavily. Emily screamed his name, tears streaming down her face as she cradled him in her arms. "We have to move!" Lucas yelled, pulling her to her feet. Reluctantly, she followed, dragging Daniel along with her. The team retreated into the shadows, pursued by relentless gunfire. Behind them, the chamber collapsed, burying the artifacts beneath tons of rubble. Though the discovery of the artifacts spread quickly among the enslaved workers, though not everyone knew the full details. Whispers echoed through the mines and living quarters, carried by those who dared to hope for something better. For Daniel and Emily, the weight of secrecy was almost unbearable. They had entrusted Lucas with their secret, but even he couldn't keep such a thing hidden forever. As more people learned about the strange object, excitement mingled with fear. Some saw it as a chance for freedom. Others worried it would bring nothing but trouble. Lucas spent every spare moment studying the artifact. He worked quietly in the corner of their cramped quarters, using scraps of metal and wires salvaged from broken equipment to create makeshift tools. His hands moved with precision, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This isn't just some piece of junk," he muttered one evening, holding the artifact up to the dim light. "It's alive, like it's waiting for something." Emily watched him intently, her curiosity growing. "Do you think it's dangerous?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Lucas admitted. "But if we can figure out how to use it, it might give us an edge, something the overseers won't expect." Daniel wasn't so sure. While he wanted to believe the artifact could change their lives, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces far beyond their understanding. "What if it backfires?" he asked, glancing nervously toward the door. "What if the overseers find out?" "They'll find out eventually," Lucas replied, his tone firm. "We need to be ready before that happens." As days turned into weeks, the rebellion began to take shape. Word reached them of others who shared their desire for freedom, people willing to risk everything to break free from the chains of oppression. Among them was Rachel, a fiery woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She had been part of a failed uprising years ago and bore the scars, both physical and emotional, to prove it. Despite her past failures, she refused to give up. When she heard about the artifact, she sought out Daniel and Emily immediately. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Rachel said when they finally met in a secluded corner of the mine. Her eyes darted around, ensuring no guards were nearby. "Either way, I want in." Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. But Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her chest. "We need all the help we can get," she said. "If you're serious about fighting, then we'll work together." Rachel nodded, seemingly impressed by Emily's determination. From that moment on, she became a key figure in their growing movement. She used her connections to gather information, smuggling messages between groups of rebels scattered across the colony. Under her guidance, they began planning small acts of sabotage, cutting power lines, damaging mining equipment, anything to disrupt the overseer's operations. At first, these actions went unnoticed. The overseers dismissed them as accidents or incompetence on the part of the workers. But as the incidents grew more frequent, suspicion started to creep in. Guards patrolled the mines more aggressively, their rifles slung low and fingers twitching, near triggers. Punishments became harsher, designed to instill fear and obedience. Yet instead of quelling the rebellion, the crackdown only fueled it further. One night, after a particularly brutal shift, Emily found herself sitting alone in the darkness. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Could they really win? Or were they simply delaying the inevitable? Just as doubt began to overwhelm her, a faint sound caught her attention, a soft tapping coming from the wall behind her. She turned slowly, her heart pounding. There, etched into the metal paneling, was a series unheard-of symbol. It looked familiar, like the patterns on the artifact. Without thinking, Emily pressed her hand against the symbols. To her astonishment, the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passageway leading deep into the earth. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a lantern and stepped inside. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of ancient stone. As she ventured deeper, she realized she wasn't alone. Voices drifted toward her, faint but unmistakable. Following the sound, she stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with strange objects. More artifacts like the ones she and Daniel had discovered. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, pulsating with a soft blue light. It looked like a machine, though its purpose was unclear. Before she could investigate further, footsteps echoed behind her. She spun around to see Lucas standing there, his expression unreadable. "How did you find this place?" he asked, his voice low. I don't know," Emily stammered. "I just followed the symbols." Lucas nodded, stepping closer to examine. The machine. "This changes everything," he said, his tone tinged with awe. "These artifacts aren't random. They're part of something bigger, a system. If we can activate it—" His words trailed off as he ran his fingers over the surface of the machine. Suddenly, the entire chamber lit up, bathing them in a brilliant glow. Alarms blared in the distance, signaling that their presence had been detected. Panic surged through Emily, but Lucas remained calm. "We need to move," he said, grabbing her arm. "Now!" They raced back through the passageway, emerging into chaos. Guards swarmed the area, shouting orders and rounding up workers. Daniel spotted them amidst the commotion and hurried over, his face pale with worry. "What happened?" he demanded. "There's no time to explain," Lucas replied. "We have to get out of here." Together, they slipped away, blending into the crowd as the overseers launched a frantic search for intruders. Though they managed to escape detection, the incident left them shaken. The overseers now knew something was happening beneath their feet, and they wouldn't stop until they uncovered the truth. Over the following days, tensions continued to rise. The rebels doubled down on their efforts, knowing they were running out of time. Rachel proposed a bold plan, a coordinated attack on one of the main mining facilities. The goal was to free as many workers as possible while drawing attention away from the hidden chamber. It was risky, but they had no other choice. Preparations began in earnest. Weapons were crafted from whatever materials they could scavenge, and teams were organized to carry out specific tasks. Emily volunteered to lead one of the groups, much to Daniel's dismay. You can't go, he argued. It's too dangerous. And what about everyone else? Emily shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. Are they supposed to fight while I stay safe? This is our chance, Daniel. We have to take it. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, though his heart ached with worry. He knew Emily was right. They couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. The rebellion needed leaders, and she had proven herself capable of stepping up when it mattered most. On the night of the attack, the air buzzed with anticipation. Rebels gathered in secret, their faces painted with streaks of dirt to blend into the shadows. Each person carried a weapon or tool ready to strike at a moment's notice. Rachel gave the final briefing, her voice steady and commanding. Remember why we're doing this, she said. For ourselves, for our families, for everyone who's suffered under the overseers. Tonight, we fight for freedom. As the operation unfolded, chaos erupted throughout the facility. Explosions rocked the ground, sending plumes of smoke into the air. Workers seized the opportunity to flee, streaming out of the mines in droves. Guards scrambled to regain control, but the sheer number of rebels overwhelmed them. For the first time in years, the enslaved workers tasted victory, but triumph came at a cost. During the battle, Rachel led a team to disable a critical checkpoint, allowing more workers to escape. As they approached the gate, gunfire erupted from above. Rachel shouted for her team to take cover, but not before taking a bullet to the shoulder. Blood soaked through her shirt as she collapsed to the ground. "No!" Emily cried, rushing to her side. She helped drag Rachel to safety, tears streaming down her face. "You can't die," she whispered. "Not now." Rachel managed a weak smile, clutching Emily's hand. "Don't stop," she rasped. "Finish what we started." With Rachel's words echoing in her mind, Emily returned to the fight, her resolve stronger than ever. By the time dawn broke, the facility lay in ruins, and hundreds of workers had been freed. Exhausted but triumphant, the rebels regrouped to assess the damage. Though the victory was significant, they knew the overseers wouldn't let it stand. Retaliation was inevitable. Back in their quarters, Daniel tended to Emily's wounds, his hands shaking as he cleaned a cut on her cheek. "You scared me," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lose you." Emily placed a hand on his arm, her gaze steady. "We're still here," she said, "and we're not giving up." Despite the losses they had suffered, hope burned brighter than ever. The rebellion had taken its first real step toward freedom, proving that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire. As the sun rose over Arendor, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, Daniel and Emily looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the dust and despair lay a future worth fighting for, one where chains no longer bound them, and dreams of liberation became reality. The air on Arendor was thick with dust and despair. The sky, a dull orange haze, seemed to press down on the backs of those who worked tirelessly in the mines below. For as long as anyone could remember, life had been this way, hard, unforgiving, and cruel. It wasn't just the planet that made existence unbearable. It was the people who ruled over them. They called themselves the Overseers, an elite class of humans from Earth who had settled on Arendor decades ago. To the enslaved workers, they were nothing more than tyrants, cold-hearted masters who cared only for profit and power. Daniel wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. His muscles ached from hours of swinging a pickaxe against the hard rock walls of the mine. Beside him, Emily, his younger sister, worked silently. She was smaller than most of the others, but no less determined. Her hands moved steadily, sorting through piles of rubble for glimmers of the precious mineral known as cryonite. This rare substance was the reason the Overseers had come to Arendor in the first place. Back on Earth, cryonite powered everything from advanced technology to interstellar travel. Here, it came at a cost. Human lives. The work never stopped. From sunrise to sunset, the enslaved miners labored under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Any sign of slacking resulted in swift punishment. Daniel had seen it happen too many times. A man named Jacob had collapsed from exhaustion just last week. Instead of offering help, the guards dragged him away. No one knew where he'd gone, but everyone assumed the worst. Silence fell over the group whenever such things occurred. Fear kept them compliant, fear of what might happen if they resisted. Despite the weight of their situation, Daniel tried to stay strong for Emily. He often reminded her of the stories their parents used to tell before they disappeared. Stories of freedom, of places far beyond Arendor where people lived without chains or overseers. One day, he would whisper during quiet moments, "We'll leave this place. We'll find somewhere better." Emily nodded each time, though doubt lingered in her eyes. At 17, she was old enough to understand how unlikely escape truly was. Still, she clung to hope because she had to. Without it, there was nothing left. Their routine rarely changed. Wake up, eat a meager meal, descend into the mines, and repeat until the day ended. But today felt different. As Daniel swung his pickaxe, something unusual caught his eye, a faint glow emanating from a crack in the rock face. Curious, he leaned closer, brushing away loose debris with his fingers. The light grew brighter, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. He glanced around to make sure none of the guards were watching, then motioned for Emily to join him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the clanging of tools and grunts of effort echoing through the cavern. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his tone hushed but excited. "Help me dig it out." Together, they worked quickly, careful, not to draw attention. After several minutes, they uncovered what appeared to be a small metallic object embedded in the stone. Its surface shimmered with intricate patterns that shifted and changed as they stared. Neither of them had ever seen anything like it before. They could examine it further. A sharp voice cut through the air. "What are you two doing?" One of the guards approached, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. His name was Carter, a man notorious for his cruelty. He sneered at them, clearly suspicious. "That's not cryonite. Put it down." Daniel froze, his mind racing. If Carter took the object, they'd never see it again. And worse, they might face punishment for wasting time. Thinking fast, he slipped the artifact into his pocket, keeping his expression neutral. "It's nothing," he said. "Just some shiny rock." Carter narrowed his eyes but didn't press further. With a dismissive wave, he turned and walked away, barking orders at another worker nearby. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding. Emily shot him a worried look, but neither of them dared speak until the guard was out of earshot. Later that evening, after the day's work had ended, the siblings retreated to their cramped quarters. These were little more than metal boxes stacked high in rows, offering barely enough space to sleep. Privacy was non-existent, so they waited until the other occupants had drifted off before pulling out the mysterious object. Under the dim light of a flickering bulb, they studied it closely. The patterns on its surface seemed alive, shifting and rearranging themselves in response to their touch. Emily traced her finger along one of the designs, gasping when the entire object suddenly vibrated. A low hum filled the room, resonating deep within their chests. "What did you do?" Daniel whispered urgently, glancing toward the door to ensure no one had heard. I don't know," Emily stammered, equally startled. "I think it reacted to me." They spent the rest of the night experimenting cautiously, trying to figure out what the artifact was capable of. It didn't take long for them to realize it was far more complex and potentially dangerous than anything they'd encountered before. The implications weighed heavily on Daniel's mind. Whoever had created this device possessed knowledge far beyond human understanding. Could it belong to the same ancient civilization rumored to have once inhabited Arendor? As dawn approached, Daniel made a decision. Whatever this thing was, it couldn't stay hidden. Someone needed to know about it. Someone who might be able to use it to change their fate. He thought of Lucas, a former engineer who now worked alongside them in the mines. Before being stripped of his status by the overseers, Lucas had been brilliant, known for his ability to solve problems others deemed impossible. If anyone could decipher the artifact's secrets, it was him. The next day, Daniel found an opportunity to speak with Lucas during a brief break. Keeping his voice low, he explained what he and Emily had discovered. At first, Lucas listened skeptically, but when Daniel showed him the object, his skepticism turned to awe. "This changes everything," he murmured, turning it over in his hands. "If we can figure out how it works." His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. This artifact could be the key to overthrowing the overseers. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could fight back against the system that had oppressed them for so long. But hope carried risks, and danger loomed large. Unbeknownst to them, news of the artifact had already reached the ears of the overseers. Deep within their fortified towers, whispers spread of a discovery that could alter the balance of power on Arendor. And where whispers went, so too did greed and violence. For Daniel and Emily, the journey ahead would test every ounce of courage they possessed. The chains of oppression still bound them tightly, but within their grasp lay the potential to shatter those bonds forever. All it would take was bravery, unity, and perhaps a little bit of luck.